This is the Extra Point Podcast from Arizona's Family.
Well, with two simple words today and a release by the Big 12, it could have caused multiple dominoes to fall all over college sports. They're back. Released by the Big 12. The Colorado Buffaloes are going back to the Big 12, leaving the Pac-12. Will the Arizona Wildcats, will the Arizona State Sun Devils be behind them? Let's get a perspective here from a man who knows all things Arizona sports. The one, the only Shane Dale. Shane, great to see you back on the Extra Point podcast and back on the air. How are things going?
Doing well, Mark. Appreciate you having me on. I think this is our semi-annual chat. I appreciate it.
Well, we'd have you. I liked when you worked in sports media. I realized the agriculture business called full time. So, Farmer Shane, I think we'll call you. But you are you do a podcast on all things Arizona. And were you able to get one out today and kind of chew on this Colorado thing and what it means for the Wildcats?
Appreciate the opportunity for the plug. Yeah, my buddy Eric Cohen and I just recorded another episode of Wildcat Country and talked about it. Of course, we're thankful that we waited toward the end of the week to record this episode because even in the middle of the summer when no sports are going on, something crazy always happens. And that's something we learned quickly while doing this podcast. So, yeah, we just turned out another one. We had Brian Jeffries, the voice of Arizona Athletics, on to talk Arizona football, of course, conference realignment, craziness, and everything else in between. So you can check that out here probably by the time this is out on YouTube and Spotify and what's the other one? iTunes. Apple.
Yeah,
Apple
all
Podcasts.
of them. I think there's like 4 more of them that we're on as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I gotta go look at the Twitter to see what we're on there. I guess it's called X now.
Whatever. We just talked about that in our podcast too. Twitter. We just call it Elon's platform because he does whatever he wants.
Right. He figured out the electric car. I think I don't know. Twitter threads.
Tesla,
Well, that's yeah. And I was going to go in that direction. But first, let's talk about this thing today with Colorado. How big, how monumental of a move is this for all the dominoes in college sports? Will Arizona and Arizona State follow, in your opinion?
Well, I think let's start with this. Let's be clear about one thing. Colorado leaving is not nearly as big a blow as UCLA or USC leaving. For a number of reasons. The market and the history of the programs. The Pac-10 was doing just fine without Colorado. Then they added Colorado and Utah and boosted their stature a little bit with making it into the Pac-12. But the conference certainly can't carry on without adding at least one school now. Whether that's SMU, San Diego State, UNLV, or another team. Like I said in our podcast, the Pac-12 isn't dead, but it's certainly on life support now. There was a multiple reports for a long time that the 10 remaining schools were united and that they were going to stick it out. And then I think Colorado had been rumored to be flirting with the Big 12 for a while anyway. And they finally said, I think enough is enough. We're getting a great deal from the Big 12. They're offering us that full revenue share, $31.7 million from the TV deal. Let's go ahead and take the sure thing. So, and you're asking my opinion. I've been pro Big 12 for Arizona for a while now. I think it's more likely we're headed that direction now than it was a few days ago. I haven't changed my opinion on what should happen, but certainly have on what could. So could you replace a Colorado with a San Diego State or an SMU? Sure, you could do that. But I think that certainly, and academics are always an issue, and that's probably maybe even the biggest reason why Arizona hasn't made the leap yet. But I think at this point, I would say, before it was probably like 2-1 that they would stay in the Pac-12. Now I think it's probably the other way around, and you'll see Arizona bolt eventually. I know Dr. Robbins, the president of Arizona, he's guaranteed that George Kliavkoff, the commissioner of the Pac-12, that he would wait until August. Not sure exactly when in August, but some point in August, which is coming up soon, to see if they could secure a deal. I think he'll be true to his word, but I think one way or the other, Arizona has to make a decision here pretty soon. And if they do, then I can't, not because Arizona is the end-all be-all in the college athletics, but I can't imagine the Pac-12 would survive yet another defection.
Well, we had Dr. Robbins on this very podcast back in June, and he was on Capitol Hill, and there was they were talking about name, image, and likeness legislation, and he was hosting a summit there, and his exact words were, I think we will have a deal here pretty soon. And he seemed optimistic about it. Obviously, that hasn't happened. I can imagine there's probably some frustration there after saying that publicly and not seeing a deal. And even Dennis Dodd, the CBS Sports college football writer, said he just couldn't believe there wasn't going to be a deal by media day. Now, I know Kliavkoff has said that the deal gets better the longer we're at the table. But you take Dion out of the mix, I imagine that's probably going to make the deal go down if whoever they're talking to, whoever is coming in there and talking to the Pac-12. Why is it a good idea for Arizona to jump ship right now and get out of Dodge?
Well, I take the sure thing, and it's one of my favorite shows. I apologize, it's not on your network, but I love Shark Tank, and I love the back and forth on the show between all the sharks and the people pitching their business. And one of the things you learn is it's okay to wait out the room sometimes, and sometimes you just need to take the best deal. And like Mark Cuban says, sometimes you should just shut up and take the deal. And you're looking at a situation where there's going to be some teams possibly left out in the cold, as in left out of a Power 5 or Power 4 or Power 3, a power conference, however these things end up. And you don't want to risk being one of those teams. And so the longer this goes on, and the more George Kliavkoff talks, the less his words hold weight with anyone, I think, because nothing's happened. It's been just talk so far. So if the Big 12 rather is extending its hand and saying, look, we'll bring you in for the same terms that we're bringing in Colorado. I know there's other issues. There's always behind the scenes stuff we don't know about, but I think Arizona is going to have to take that leap. That $31.7 million it's guaranteed money, as opposed to, and on Fox and ESPN as well, on, two big name networks that are, that fans watch. And I think that, as opposed to, I don't know if you're looking at the CW or whatever with the Pac-12. So again, Colorado's not as big a deal, but leaving as UCLA and USC are. But I think that if the Big 12 is offering, I think Arizona needs to take that step. It's a sure thing versus rolling the dice with a guy, a former Las Vegas guy, appropriately. So, Kliavkoff, I don't think everything that's happening has been his fault. I think a lot of it had to do with the previous guy, Larry Scott, and it's kind of like a new president comes in and gets blamed for the economic failures of the previous president. It's just how it works. But with that said, I think he seems like he's in over his head. He was a high risk outside the box hire in what may have ultimately been a long shot to save the conference. And that risk certainly hasn't paid off to this point. And you keep talking about, we're going to have a deal by media day or by this deadline. Oh, it didn't happen. Oh, that's a good thing. And let me explain why. Eventually those words just don't hold weight anymore. And the more you hear it, the less it holds weight with me and anyone else. And I think if Arizona, again, has that opportunity, which it sounds like they do. My buddy Eric Cohen on our podcast has a source who said that it sounds like that the Big 12 is theirs if they want it, and they're getting the same kind of deal that Colorado is. I think they need to take it and run. Should
Arizona and Arizona State go together?
On a personal level, I would like to see it, just because I'd like to see the rivalry continue to go. And that doesn't mean they couldn't play each other in football or in other sports, especially football, because you see, Clemson, South Carolina, and
Colorado State,
BYU, Utah, in most years, Florida State. But some rivalries fizzle out. It would be a shame if this one did. I think it would make a lot of sense. And again, my buddy Eric Source, who's been spot on to this point, has said that ASU will probably follow Arizona's lead in this, which I don't know how that happens. I don't know exactly why Arizona's sort of holding all the cards here, but it sounds like they kind of are. And I know Brett McMurphy reported earlier that the dream scenario for the Big 12 would be to add 3 more schools, namely Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah. So I think that would make a lot of sense. Arizona and ASU have always been in the same conference, whether it's the Border Conference or the WAC or the Pac-10 or the Pac-12. It would just be weird to see them in different conferences, but I think also it would make sense to keep them together for that reason.
So is this okay, dream scenario then? Is this a basketball conference or is this a football conference?
Well, and we had a media rights expert on our podcast last week, Patrick Kreitz, who used to work out for Fox, and he had some great insight into that. And he said basketball really only makes up for about 15 to 20% of the revenue. So as much as, as an Arizona fan, you get excited about the possibility of Arizona, Kansas once or twice, or even 3 times a year in a conference tournament. Football is what drives the train. And if that has to be at the forefront. So I think Arizona would have some great matchups in basketball. They've got a great non-conference schedule this year. And with UCLA leaving, they lose their top rival. I know in football it's ASU, but in men's basketball, more often than not, Arizona UCLA is the big rival. And with UCLA going, I think that it makes the Pac-12 less attractive from that standpoint. But again, it's almost all about football. Arizona has that pedigree of being blue blood or pseudo blue blood programs. So I think that's can only help, but I don't think that's what ends up making or breaking a possible deal with the Big 12.
What are the advantages to staying in the Pac-12, Pac-10, Pac-9? What are they now? Math was a journalism major.
9 at the moment. Yeah, I know. Well, I didn't go to school for math either, so no worries. But I think in terms of recruiting, and we just had Brian Jeffries on, and he talked about, if you make the move to the Big 12, it's different. You have different recruiting areas, and Texas being the big one. California, Arizona's made some big inroads there lately in football. You look at all the guys they brought in from Servite High School. They call it Juice County with Tedero McMillan. And Jacob Manu on the defensive side, who made a couple of big plays in that ASU game. So that they've made some big inroads under Jed Fish and his staff again in California after they hadn't for a while. So the recruiting landscape would change drastically. And so I think there's certain advantages that the Pac-12 offers in terms of still having that California connection, even without UCLA and USC. If they did add San Diego State, obviously that would add another California school back into the mix. So. And then culturally as well, just the history of the program. Arizona and ASU have been with the Pac-10/Pac-12 since the late 70s, so they're kind of synonymous with the conference. They made it the Pac-10 at the time because it was the Pac-8 before them. So culturally, it makes more sense. Academically, I know it does. And then in terms of recruiting, especially at the football level, maybe that makes more sense, even though certainly there's a lot of fertile recruiting ground in the Big 12 as well.
Does this hurt basketball at all based on the competition? Is recruiting going to get tougher in your opinion, or do you think that playing this type of schedule, if they were to go to the Big 12, could even enhance the Wildcats' prestige nationally?
I don't think it makes that much of a difference, because I think most importantly, basketball players, same as football players, they're coming number one because they think going to that particular school will help them get to the next level. That's why you see Gonzaga, which is still not part of a Power 5 conference, or they don't have a football program, but they're still technically a mid-major in basketball. They bring a lot of big name recruits in because they believe that they play for Mark Few at Gonzaga, that they could get to the next level. They have a better chance of getting there and being successful. And that's what drives that. And that's why Tommy Lloyd's been able to bring in some top transfers, some top commits, especially out of Europe. Having that European pipeline and that Eastern European pipeline specifically has been big for him. So I don't know if it makes that big an impact. I think that the name Arizona still holds weight regardless of what conference they're in. And I think even more importantly than that, the Tommy Lloyd and his coaching staff have proven that they're able to recruit, especially overseas, but even in the country as well. They've landed some big name commits for the following season. They have one in KJ Lewis coming in this year. So I don't think that's going to make a difference. I think a coaching change would make a bigger difference than a conference change in that regard.
What, as far as, if the dream scenario that Brett McMurphy's talking about were to become a reality, how in your opinion does a conference like that stack up with the Big Ten and the SEC?
I think it's close. I think they'd probably still be third behind those two conferences, especially because Texas and OU are going to the SEC. Those are your two biggest name programs. There's no getting around that, in terms of football. I think they'd be a close third. I think they'd be competitive. I think some of the additions the Big 12 has already made they've been pretty good. BYU and Houston and UCF are all pretty solid additions. Oklahoma State and Baylor are already there. TCU played the national championship game. We don't have to remember what happened in that game, but they got there. So there's already some reasonably big name schools there. And I think adding Arizona and Arizona State and Utah and Colorado will be an enhancement, not as big an enhancement as probably UCLA and USC joining the Big Ten. But I think they would, at this point in time or in a year or two, whenever it does happen, I think they'd probably be third behind those two conferences, maybe ahead of the ACC. But I think it's a move that should be made, and a move that would only bolster the conference. Yeah,
and we're talking about it like it already has been, but I think we're both looking at this saying you have to do this. Back. Right. Yeah. I don't see. Okay, so let's think about this. What if it doesn't happen? What if you stay in the Pac-12? What becomes of the Pac-12 nationally? I mean, I feel like you are. You're going back to the 70s. What's your opinion?
Yeah. My question is, at what point does the Pac-12 cease to become a Power 5 conference or a power conference, period? At what point has that already happened, or is that going to happen with just the 9 schools left, or even if they add San Diego State as a 10th school, will that happen eventually? Will they still be seen as that power conference? I mean, let's remember, even in football, they haven't really been that relevant lately anyway. You know, that Washington made it to the college football playoff once. Oregon did. You don't see them in the top 4 very often. You certainly don't see them in the championship games. And then you lose 2 of your top schools on top of that. You have to worry about Oregon and Washington potentially going to the Big Ten or somewhere else. So I think that's the risk. Even if they get a TV deal that they like well enough, okay, how long does that last? How long is the conference still relevant? And I think you talk about recruiting, maybe in terms of football, that could be something that comes back and bites the conference. And I think a 9, the 9 remaining teams, and then if you throw in San Diego State or SMU or whoever, to me that doesn't really say power conference. Even with Oregon and Washington in there, I think you're just treading water in terms of the eyes of fans and the selection committee and everyone else. And eventually, I think that they maybe cease to become part of that discussion.
Man, it's stunning, absolutely stunning to think about what has happened here in the last 5 years in college sports, from the transfer portal to NIL to conference realignment. I mean, Nick King, our great sports reporter here at Arizona's Family, texted today, and I think it was under the effect of, if college sports ceased to exist, I would not be sad at all, which is crazy because, I mean, this is a guy that has a lot of passion for it. I mean, how much damage do you feel like is being done long-term right now for college sports?
It's funny. My wife is not a sports fan at all. And one of the reasons she doesn't like pro sports is she says, well, it's so easy for the players just to go to another team. It's just, they go in the off season, sometimes they go in the middle of the season, they get traded. And that's, I think one of the things we love about college sports, or had loved, is that you have more of that loyalty. And now with the transfer portal and NIL money, kind of both these crazy things happening pretty much at the same time, a lot of that so-called loyalty is out the window now, and guys can just hop from one school to the next. You see some football players and basketball players now they're onto their 4th or 5th school, and just being that easy to go, it's hard to really develop a following. I mean, the guys aren't there for that long anyway, 4 or 5 years tops, and now you have to worry about guys hitting the transfer portal and exiting if they have 1 year but they don't get like their playing time, or they don't get the NIL deal that they want. And so I'm all for college players being able to make money off their name, image, and likeness, but I think this is an unfortunate side effect combined with the timing of the transfer portal. It's a tough time in college sports, and it's one of the reasons why back in the day when I did wear sports jerseys, I would either buy jerseys that had no name on the back or had the name of a player who had probably retired. Like Larry Fitzgerald was safe to wear, right? But I got burned so many times in buying jerseys with the guys who were currently playing for the team, because a year later, like I remember buying a Joe Johnson jersey and then a month later being filled with regret. Okay.
Do you still have it? You should hang it behind you.
I should. I should put it behind my DeAndre Ayton bobblehead.
Is that Nick Foles too next to him?
That's Nick Foles, okay. And then DeAndre Ayton, and then I got myself a Gronk rookie card back there.
Oh, so. Who else is on the Mount Rushmore of U of A, by the way? Would you put those 3 and Steve Kerr, Sean Elliott?
Are you just talking players?
Yeah. If you have a Mount Rushmore behind you, what?
I think Sean Elliott would have to go up there for sure.
Yeah.
And if you're talking other sports, I think he might have to go in. Softball's the most successful program they've had. He'd probably put Jenny Finch up. Jenny Finch might be number 1. There's a lot of players you could put up there, but Jenny Finch would probably be up there. Beyond that, gosh, you put me on the spot here. There's been a lot of great players in other sports.
Willie Tuitama.
I like Willie, but I would not put him on the Mount Rushmore. And to be fair, I wouldn't. I don't know if I put Rob Gronkowski either, just because he didn't play that much for Arizona. He's one of the best players in the history of the program. Don't get me wrong, but he played like a year and a half at Arizona. He had a lot of injuries. Yeah. So there's that. But I think Sean Elliott would be number 1, Jenny Finch, and I have to think about the rest. Maybe think about Terry Francona, who played for the World Series team in '81, or the College World Series team for Arizona in '81. Football.
Trump candidate, Teddy Bruschi.
Teddy Bruschi would have to be up there for sure. Yeah, he might be up there. Chuck Cecil maybe as well would be in that discussion. So
Heath Miller. Is it Heath Miller, 14, the safety? Heath Bray.
Oh, we've had Heath. We've had Heath on our podcast. He's got a son who's playing some good high school ball at quarterback. I hope Arizona makes him an offer.
Where's he at?
I forget. Somewhere in Scottsdale. I don't remember the school. I'm embarrassed because he. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So Wildcat football this year, as you have been able to, look at all the numbers and all the quotes here, how do you feel about Jed Fish here in year 3? Is this a team that could go to a bowl game?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what I've said ad nauseum on our podcast, and people are probably tired of hearing about it. I think that they're likely to be better this season, and yet they might not have a better win-loss record because, number one, I think the rest of the conference has collectively improved, especially how long has it been since this conference has been this stacked at quarterback? It's ridiculous. Jaden Delora is very good, but you could argue he's in the bottom half of starting quarterbacks in this conference. And so you combine that, and I think just the overall talent level of the conference has risen along with Arizona. And the fact that Arizona's got a tougher schedule this year. They have to go on the road to play Mississippi State. It's an odd-numbered year, which means the Territorial Cup game is in Tempe. Odd-numbered years, it's always in Tempe. And even though ASU is not supposed to be very good, you never know about that game. Arizona hasn't won that game in Tempe since 2011. And most of their tougher games are at home, and easier games are on the road, so there really are no gimmies. So I think offensively they return 9 of 11 starters. They have a great offensive line for the first time that I can remember. I'm actually excited about their offensive line. They've got a lot of depth at running back. They've got a returning quarterback. They've in good shape at wide receiver, despite Dorian Singer leaving for USC. Defense, a huge question mark again. A lot of new faces from a roster that wasn't good at all last year. They did bring in Dwayne Aquina on the defensive side for coaching, which I think is going to be big. But it could be a little while. I'm excited about where they're going to go in a year or two, depending on what conference they're in. You never know. I think that maybe 7 or 8 wins in a year or two is realistic. This year, I think a bowl game is probably. It should be the goal, but I think 5 wins may be about right just because it's a tougher schedule and the conferences, I think, as a whole is a little bit tougher as well.
All right. Do you have one more book left in you? And if so, what's this chapter called?
The chapter is called No More. I think I'm done. By the way, Mark, I just remembered that 2011 game that last time Arizona beat ASU in Tempe. You were on the sidelines for that game, and you interviewed, I think, a very wet Tim Kish after that game.
Yes, and he was a little grouchy, but yeah, he got the big Gatorade bath. Foles got hurt in that game. And
Nick
then
Foles got hurt toward the end. Bryson Burney, the fight, like the 5th-year senior comes in and throws he throws it. Technically, it was a touchdown, game-winning touchdown pass. Really, it was a screen pass, I think, to Jerron Kreiner, who made the play happen.
That's right.
That was a big upset win. But that was the last time Arizona beat ASU in Tempe. But I remember you interviewed interim coach Tim Kish after that game. And, last time they beat ASU was 12 years ago.
As he got the Gatorade bath, that was fantastic. Yeah. That was probably one of the last games in the whole when the stadium was that big in Sun Devil. I mean, just packed, and it was just such a great rivalry. And you just want to see it continue, but times they are changing. So we appreciate your perspective as we try to sort this out.
Yeah, well, and hopefully in I think 4 years we're going to have our 100th Territorial Cup game, as long as they don't screw it up. So maybe you'll have me back on to chat about that.
100. So does that mean that they have to lose the trophy again, or you have to go find it, or we have a scavenger hunt where we put it in the desert? And
it was missing for over 80 some years, found randomly in a Tempe church basement.
Found randomly on a guy's podcast behind him. I think you need to steal the trophy and put it behind you for the podcast.
I actually have a mini one that I had up there for a while after Arizona beat ASU last year. First time I could actually display it on our podcast since they finally won that game in excruciating fashion. But yeah, maybe I'll put it back up. I'll switch out the old Gronk rookie card with my mini Territorial Cup here in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, very good. All right, and tell us one more time where we can find your stuff and what you're burning on next.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I find us on Twitter at X or Elon's platform. We're calling it Elon's platform. At Cat Country AZ. Find us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube, Wildcat Country. My buddy Eric Cohen, who's doing great stuff for CBSSports.com. He's got some great. If you're into the gambling type, I'm not. Follow him. He's got some great gambling picks. He does some great work for them. We're gonna have some great guests on. We've already had over, I think we've had 101 unique guests in 162 episodes. Eric actually did the math, so a lot of great insight. I learn a lot. He learns a lot for every episode. So check us out and find us on Twitter at Cat Country AZ and follow me at Shane Dale AZ.
The Extra Point Podcast is a production of 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.